It's a new day on Deep Space Nine, and Morn has murderized a flower. That's because there's someone he wants to give the corpse to, this heralding the start of a romance episode. It continues with Dax telling Sisko and Odo that she's off on her hollybobs with Worf to Risa, the Federation's designated planet of sexy times. Worf didn't fancy it, but Dax convinced him. Worf also doesn't fancy Dax talking about their personal lives with her friends, and you could argue that he's got a point when Bashir and Leeta ask to tag along on the trip. His chance of spending some quality time alone with Dax drops further still when they arrive at the megashuttle to discover Quark waiting as well. He wouldn't give Leeta time off without joining them, so the twosome becomes a fivesome. At least they all take the hint and bugger off when we arrive. Perhaps they would have done so anyway, as it's clear Worf has little intention of integrating. As far as he's concerned, Risa is just a fiction of paradise maintained by scientific means, and he only agreed to come along so they could talk. Worf's goal becomes increasingly unlikely when one of Dax's old friends appears. We'll assume she recognized the name on a guest list, as the last time Dax was here, they were Curzon Dax. In fact, Arundis here is the reason why Jadzia Dax exists in the first place, as she's responsible for Curzon carking it, though death by dirty little bastard is far from a bad exit. Quite how the logistics of that worked isn't explained, as the pilot episode showed the Dax symbiont being removed from a conscious Curzon, but let's assume they were transported in stasis back to Trill after an orgasm-induced heart attack or something. Arundis offers to show them both around, an offer abruptly declined by Worf. She leaves so that Worf and Dax can have their resulting argument in peace. A long story short, he's jealous that Dax spends time with former partners. That's just one branch of a larger tree though, namely that Dax's attitudes and behaviour don't fall into the limited range he's taught himself to consider appropriate for a partner. Dax makes it clear that she's loyal and considers their relationship closed, but also that she has no intention of moulding herself into the form he expects. She goes off to have a drink of something to which she's slightly allergic to make her point about not being controlled, while Worf trots off to change. Or not. Before Worf gets a chance to test his skin-tight swimming shreddies, he's interrupted by a visitor. This lad's name is Fullerton, and he's here to invite Worf to a rally for his group. He's the head of the new Essentialists movement, and they want to return to traditional Federation values, which, as far as he's concerned, means shutting down places like Risa. Worf took a copy of Fullerton's literature and likes what he's read, specifically the bits where he says it's all going to shit. His sense of Federation decadence probably isn't helped by finding Leeta receiving a gizmo massage from someone other than Bashir, so he decides to attend the rally. It's being held on the beach where Bashir's already sitting, and with someone who isn't Leeta. That has Worf concluding Risa is the problem, a rather tactless observation when Arundis just arrived. These rallies have been going on for a little while, and it's not changed anything, so she lets them continue. It's not hurting anyone, and Fullerton's lot seem to get something from it, so where's the harm? Fullerton and company arrive to applause, some of which might even be genuine. Cue a speech about everybody here being a hedonistic toddler and us needing to grow up if we want to survive, all delivered with the passion and conviction of a used car salesman on horse tranquilizers. He ends with apocalyptic predictions if people don't start taking life more seriously, which is to say, having as little fun as he does. Worf thinks he might have a point. The recent Klingon unpleasantness was caused in part by them sensing weakness, or at least Worf believes it was. Neither Dax nor Bashir are inclined to take up the argument, the latter doubly so when Leeta arrives. The two showing affection after being seen with other people earlier drives Worf over the edge, and he claims they're being dishonourable. They're confused by his outburst. The whole point of coming here was that they're splitting up, and the Bajorans have a custom of celebrating the end of a relationship and the freedom it brings. They go off for a bit of dirty little bastard together, while Worf does some more bitching. Not for long, as Fullerton's mates arrive with weapons. They knock some stuff over and tear a few drapes, but before Dax can start kicking their asses, Fullerton turns up and explains this was just a demonstration. Dax tells him she can collar Fullerton for his stunt, this apparently being a power that Starfleet officers have, but he thinks there's no point as the locals wouldn't press charges. Quite how that changes the fact Dax and Worf had weapons pointed at them is beyond me, but let's ignore that for now. As days go, it's been a pretty shit one. All it needs is another argument between Worf and Dax about their relationship to top it off, so obviously that happens too. It's the following morning, and the damage caused by Fullerton's goons is getting fixed. Arundis hopes she can fix Dax's currently awful holiday too, especially considering how much Curzon loved the place. She is here to please, after all. While they get reacquainted, Bashir and Lita are officially breaking up. Quark's disappointed by the lack of a fight, though it picks up a bit when Lita admits she was thinking about someone else during the end of their relationship. Bashir wants to know too now, and neither he nor Quark expects the answer. It would seem that Rom, the underappreciated brother, is not underappreciated by everybody. There are surprises for Worf, too, when he finds Dax and Arundis having a go at some pottery. The two being a tiny bit handsy is enough to drive him over the edge, and once he's smashed some shit back in their room, he goes to see Fullerton. Worf's had an idea for how to give him what he wants. Dax is wondering where Worf has got to when the storm starts, a worrying development at the best of times, and even more so when your planet's climate is artificially controlled, and storms should be impossible. Fullerton arrives to gloat while Arundis is reassuring guests, though he gives credit to Worf for the idea. They've turned off the weather control, and it'll take a few days to get up and running again. Until then, the guests here can experience Riser without the alterations we made. Nobody's impressed with Worf, but he doesn't give a shit. He thinks he's right, and that's all that matters. He stays around for a while longer, though, at least according to the guy who says a good third of the guests have buggered off over the last 3 days. Maybe Worf just wanted to gloat as well. Either way, he's now decided to leave and bids Fullerton farewell. Fullerton, however, is just getting started. We've not had an argument between Dax and Worf for a while, so let's do that before they go. She's calling all of this what it is, Worf shitting on a load of holidaymakers because he was jealous, and all of it could have been solved by just trusting her. It's more than that, though, a general dislike of her willingness to live in the moment, which is all the more confusing as that's how most Klingons behave. That sounds like a cue for a lore dump, and we learn that when Worf was a kid with his adoptive human parents, he used to play sports ball. In one particularly important game, a 13-year-old Worf went to head the ball and instead broke a kid's neck. For those of you wondering, a quick look at the current FA rules suggests this constitutes serious foul play and comes with a red card and 3-game suspension. Anywho, the fragility of humans taught him to restrain himself, and that's who he is now. Knowing why he needs to feel in control helps Dax understand his behaviour, though not ignore it. Controlling his own life is one thing, controlling hers is quite another. Speaking of control, the weather system starts throwing a more serious wobbly by giving them a little earthquake. Worf's quick to understand what's happening, and off to see Fullerton we go. He's delighted by the chaos he's causing, so much so that even his mate is hesitant at going further. They compromise by agreeing to fuck this planet up some more once they're ready to scarp her, a plan that's scuppered by the arrival of Worf. Fullerton's attempts to convince Worf this is what he wanted don't work. He takes the control and shuts off the earthquakes, which makes Fullerton a tad upset and results in a slap. The slap earns Fullerton a throw, perhaps to prove that the Federation will stand up to violence when needed, or perhaps just because Worf wanted to. It's the end of their holiday and the weather is back to normal, though you could argue it's back to abnormal. Either way, it's an improvement. Arundis hopes both Dax and Worf will return, which confuses Worf a little, what with the terrorism and all. It does improve his mood enough to consider skinny dipping with Dax, though, so we'll leave her to enjoy the sight of a freely swinging Klingon dangus until the next adventure. The old Worf gets jealous and does a terrorism story. How honourable. Let's start by being generous, though, and point out that the story itself does have some merit. Not as a question of whether people who enjoy leisure are weak, but as an examination of how the likes of Fullerton can capitalise on the concerns of others to further their own goals. A little while back in the Season 3 episode Equilibrium, we were introduced to the Trill Guardians. In our video for it, I made a throwaway gag about the Guardians by saying they had nothing to do with a UK drama show from the 70s of the same name. In truth, I'd not watched the show by that point, having either seen it mentioned in a list somewhere or perhaps during one of my IMDb rabbit holes where I see an interesting actor and check them out. John Rhys-Davies was in it briefly at the start of his career, so perhaps I spotted it after checking him out when he was in Voyager. Anyway, you can imagine my surprise when I finally got round to actually watching it and came across this poster in a scene. I've been thinking about it on and off ever since, and I'm still not sure if this being broadcast all the way back in 1971 is funny or heartbreaking. My point is that nostalgia merchants who harken back to the good old days have been around for as long as we've had recorded history, and their approach to the facts is as predictable as it is dubious. Fullerton in this episode is just such a nostalgia merchant. He talks about taking the Federation back to its moral and cultural traditions, but consider for a moment what he actually means by that. The last I checked, the Federation of 100 years prior had a certain Captain Kirk doing the dirty with a new alien lass every other week. The only tangible change is that Riser has more comfortable beds. Or perhaps he means the Federation's approach to foreign relations. You know, the one that's always been about mutually beneficial coexistence and diplomacy being the preferred choice in all circumstances. Maybe he thinks we're doing peace wrong now or some shit. Even him claiming validation for people leaving is inherently flawed. Visitors went there for a specific purpose, and that's to experience a pleasant holiday. Calling their departure proof that they're weak is a logical fallacy. If you take a shit in the middle of a buffet table and people stop eating, you've not made a point about the food or the diners. You've made a point about yourself. What Fullerton actually means with all of this, of course, is what people generally mean when they say such things. Life was different for him than the generation he sees now, or at least he believes it was. Rather than celebrate the fact, or even bother to learn whether it's true, he wants everybody to have his experience so they know what a big, brave boy he is and why he's so much better than them. It's egotism born of ignorance, an unwillingness to see perceived changes as anything other than bad. He has no actual facts for why this is all wrong, so it's pitched as general immorality or a departure from tradition. You appeal to emotion when you have nothing that will appeal to logic. Because this is illogical. The main point of this episode is to ask if polyamorous or sex-positive people are weak or without values. Not that the production team could actually show it in the way that they wanted, of course. Our old friend William Hayes casts a long shadow for someone who was buried nearly 70 years ago, and too much skin on screen is still a no-no, which is why the Federation's designated fuck planet had so many people wearing sarongs. Regardless, the sex equals bad trope is as old as it is inaccurate. In my experience, polyamorous or sex-positive people are the ones with the strongest understanding of boundaries and consent and possess the most willingness to enforce them. They're also the people most likely to show concern for the well-being of others, a far cry from the self-indulgence with which they're attributed. The word aftercare wasn't even in my lexicon until I met some of them. The story does at least try to show that Fullerton and company are wrong, albeit tentatively. It's significantly undermined by there being absolutely no consequences for their actions, and Worf just going back to work after doing a bit of the old terrorism is a particularly egregious oversight, but at least Fullerton gets bounced off a table. People fighting to protect what they have was his goal after all, so that should make him happy. It's good to think that one person got to be happy from all this, because it likely wasn't the viewer. I'm not sure this goes all the way to stinker territory, as it did at least give us something to think about, but you'd struggle to call it good. That's a view shared by the writers, with both Ira Stephen Bear and Robert Hewitt Wolfe saying this episode is at the top of their regret list. To be fair, that's far from entirely their fault. Making a story about sex for a show constrained by being placed in a family time slot was always going to be a difficult job. Would it have worked without those constraints if, for example, they'd been filming it for a streaming service? Maybe, but I'm not convinced. The central question itself only works through the lens of taboos and misconceptions carried by today's society rather than an enlightened future whose guiding principle is inclusion. It also ignores that Risa has been a pleasure planet and tourist destination since before the birth of the Federation, which largely undermines Fullerton's entire argument. Whatever the worth of the core idea, it's fair to say that what we got was one of the weaker showings in all of Deep Space Nine. It just goes to show that, even on Risa, they can't all be bangers. End of episode.
Goddamn son of a bitch piece of crap.
There goes reinstall 29. Fare thee well, son, we hardly know ye.
It's like this thing is deliberately trying to boil my piss.
Maybe it's recognised you as a competitor and considered you a threat.
I'll be more than a threat if it keeps pulling shit like this.
That's it, lad, you assert dominance. In the meantime, maybe we should consider getting a wee bit of advice.
That won't be necessary. I'm definitely getting the hang of this.
Look, I'm not saying it won't be 30th time lucky. I'm just saying there's no harm in seeing if there's an expert around.
You're already talking to an expert. I'm a literal computer.
And that's grand, but maybe we need another perspective.
Be honest, you don't think I'm up to it.
Nobody's casting aspersions on your skill, not least of which because I don't know what the word means. I just think a second ed might be useful.
Fine, sure, whatever. Come to think of it, we actually do know someone who has both an interest and a little hands-on experience with 20th century computers.
Do we? That's great. Let's get him involved.
His name's Tom Paris.
Now that you mention it, why don't you have another go?